Okay. Well, good afternoon, all of you out there who are watching at home. I have the distinct pleasure of having Pastor Shane with me via the internet, and we're going to try something new today. So a little something I'm going to call Pastors Interviewing Pastors. I know a lot of pastors who have very interesting stories. Pastor Shane is definitely one of them, and so I thought we'd take some time today and talk to him and let him tell you a little bit about his story to ministry. And I think one thing that I didn't kind of reveal to Pastor Shane, but I hope is the case, is that to impress upon young people and people of all ages that pastoral ministry is something to be taken up, and it is filled by all sorts of different people who have different stories and have come about it through different ways. So that's Pastor Shane. Thank you for being here with me today.
Sure, glad to do it.
Well, a lot of people probably know your story a little bit, but I don't know if you've ever talked to me about it necessarily in detail. I know that you started out as a Lutheran school teacher. So could you tell me a little bit about your first feeling the call to be a teacher first, and then kind of how things developed from there?
Well, actually, I went to prep school to be a pastor.
Okay, this is all new to me. Tell me more about that.
So my pastor, when I was in confirmation class, suggested to me and my mother it would be good for me to go to St. Paul's College, Concordia, Missouri. And after visiting about it and whatever, we decided that would be a good thing to do. I went there for 4 years of high school and 1 year of college. But after I got in my first year of college, all of a sudden I looked at the number of years to finish to be a pastor, and I thought, that's a lot of time in school.
You know, could I back up for a minute? And I don't know if many people know this at home, but back in the day, Concordia St. Paul was a boarding school high school. Is that correct?
That's correct. Concordia, Missouri was a boarding high school.
Right, and then the college was also attached to the high school. Is that right?
Yes, we had a junior college.
So you would do the 2 years of your high school were considered college then?
Yeah, so there were 6 years that we would be there.
Oh, okay. Okay, so it's 6 years total that you would be there. And then from there, you could decide to go on to either Seminary St. Louis, which was another 4 years, or it wasn't Fort Wayne, it was Springfield, right?
Or to one of the teachers' colleges.
Right. So after doing 4 years of high school and 1 year of junior college, you kind of changed your mind a little bit?
Yeah, I looked at the number of years left to get through the seminary, and it was like, that's going to be a lot of time and a lot of money, and my folks weren't very wealthy at all. In fact, we were very poor. So
what did your folks do?
My dad was a construction worker. My mom did all sorts of jobs. She ended up finally as a CNA in a nursing home and then at the hospital. But before that, she was doing home cleaning and wallpapering and painting and all sorts of things.
Okay. So you decided to change gears then, and you decided to go into to be a school teacher.
Yeah, the first thing was to convince my mother of that was all right.
What did she say?
She didn't like the idea. So I wasn't very good, okay? I purposely flunked my Greek class.
Oh, no.
Second semester. Not really. I dropped from straight A's to a C's. And got to. I just didn't study. That was the easy way out. So I told her that wasn't working, and which was a lie. And so she said, okay, if you want to be a Lutheran school teacher, that's fine. So after 1 year of college, I ended up transferring back home for 1 year because I could get the core classes at a junior college in my hometown in Iowa Falls, Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
After that, I went to Concordia Teachers College, it was called at that time, in Seward, Nebraska.
How many years did you go to Seward then?
Just 1 year and one summer.
Wow. So you got a lot of your...
I finished up during the summers because Minnesota would let you teach with 3 years of college, even 2 years of college.
Okay. So you did some work while you were at home, and then went to Seward for a year in summers, and just like that, you're out in the field.
Just like that, I was out in the field, yes.
What was your preliminary area of teaching? Were you a history teacher or?
No, I was teaching grades 5 through 8 elementary and the principal of a two-room school.
Okay, so you were kind of. Was there any? I know nowadays with education degrees they kind of have an area of emphasis. Did you have any area of emphasis in your
My
teaching
area of
degree?
emphasis was sociology and music for a minor.
Okay, okay,
Plus, then we had to have the education background for
sure.
certification.
Yeah, I that was the li- the lion's share of my courses in college were music, but probably a third of them were education courses. So,
Yes,
you know,
yes. We had to take all the methods courses for
right.
every subject that we would be teaching in an elementary classroom.
What now? So you were teaching. How long did you spend in that one room schoolroom teaching that school?
I taught 4 years at that school. My wife was the lower grade teacher, but after 3 years, she went to St. Paul.
Okay. What do you mean by that? She went to go get training at St. Paul, or?
No, she had a contract to teach in East St. Paul at a Lutheran School Association up there teaching first grade.
Oh, so your school is close to St. Paul then?
Pardon?
Your school was in St. Paul as well?
No, Red Wing, Minnesota.
Oh, so Jan was commuting that whole time.
Well, no. She moved to St. Paul after 3 years
My goodness.
at the start.
So you guys were living apart for a while?
Actually, we were dating.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, now I'm on the same page with you. So you guys were dating at the time. She was in St. Paul. You were in Red Wing. That must have been
Yes.
hard in your relationship.
Well, let's just say every weekend it was one of us going 55 miles one way or the other and spending the weekend.
That's terrific. Were you living on your own then, or did I know that sometimes teachers would live with maybe another member of the congregation or the church? Did you do that, or were you
No,
living
I
on
had
your
my
own?
own apartment.
In your own apartment. So you were the principal and a teacher there. So you're teaching every
Yes.
day, and you're the principal. Were you doing music there too?
Yes. In those days, Lutheran school teachers were expected to do everything. In fact, when I first got there, we were even sweeping our own classroom floors.
That doesn't surprise me, honestly.
So then, while we were there, she and I were both, when I first got there, she and I were both the youth counselors. So we were doing, it was called Walther League at that time. And she was teaching the lower grade Sunday school teachers. I was teaching the upper grade Sunday school teachers. And then I ended up doing all the music for the whole school. Not that I was directing senior choir, and after a while I was playing organ and directing senior choir.
What was the church connected to your school?
It was all in one building,
What was the name of the church?
Concordia.
Concordia's Church, and then Concordia School they're all in one building together.
Yes,
So you and Jan were doing youth work at Concordia Church,
yes,
doing Walther League work.
yes.
So Jan would come down from Red Wing on the weekends and teach Sunday school, do youth work, those kind of things.
No, they called it different teacher to take the lower grades in. So she and I were doing all that stuff
Oh, okay, I see. I
at
got you.
St. Paul.
So how do you get from being a school teacher in Concordia to ending up being a pastor? Where did it change?
Well, I ended up taking a contract, and that ultimately was called, I finished my 4-year degree up at Spring Lake Park, which is northern suburb of Minneapolis. So I went there and I was teaching and being principal of a school. We had preschool through 6th grade, and I had a cook and a full-time custodian, and I was over the whole school.
Must have been nice having a custodian for once, not to sweep your own floors.
Well, we finally got one in Red Wing too that
Oh, you did?
did thing, but they got the church custodian to do the school and the church.
Okay. Um, Now, so you're at this new church. When does the call start kind of weighing on your heart again to go into pastoral ministry?
Well, I was up there for 5 years, but the year before I developed some health problems and ended up in the hospital and had surgery. And so I'm lying there in my bed in the hospital, and finally I said, Lord, you're trying to tell me something. What is it that you want me to do? And my mom kept telling me that my uncle, who was my sponsor, kept saying he wished I would go back and finish what I started to be a pastor.
And at that time, your uncle was still alive.
Yes.
Wow, that's great.
So he prayed, and I prayed, and I said, Lord, if you want me to be a pastor, you got to give me a sign of some sort. So my doctor had said that I probably should get out some of the stress for a while. So I took a call to Quincy, Illinois. Well, that happened to be equidistant from Springfield, Illinois, and from St. Louis.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, so guess what? We had a pastor then who was the associate pastor that I had and been friends with. His dad was the pastor at Concordia, Missouri when I was in high school. And so he ended up getting a call to St. Louis to be the admissions counselor. So guess what?
I'd imagine he weighed upon your
All
heart.
of a sudden, he and I are talking, and he said, well, this is easy. You can take colloquy and come down here and finish your work to be a pastor. So that's what I ended up doing. The reason I didn't go to Springfield, being a married student, was the fact that they were moving to Fort Wayne that year. And I told Jan, I said, if I go to Fort Wayne, chances are in this transition, they'll lose all my paperwork and whatever, and I'll just be in trouble.
Sure.
So since Dave Wollenberg, my friend, was at the St. Louis Sam as admissions counselor, he worked everything out for me, got me some jobs down there and whatever.
Now, when you went to St. Louis, then you were already married to Jan at that point, right?
Yeah, Jan and I were married, and we had 4 children when we went to the seminary.
What year was that?
That was 1976.
At that, when I went there in, it was 2004, it was very normal at that point for married guys to be on campus. But I have to imagine when you went, it was pretty abnormal for married guys to be on campus.
Let's just say, except for one other guy, I was the oldest one on campus. And I was only 33.
Yeah, I don't know if people know that who, these are things only pastors kind of experience, but at one time, up until, I don't know, maybe you can correct me, but I'd say maybe like 30 years ago at one time, the bulk of the guys going to SEM were coming out of the pipeline of pre-seminaries, and they were, for the most part, they were single, and then probably about when you started going there in the 80s, it kind of started to change a little bit where you started to see some more second career guys go on to the SEM, but in the 60s and 70s, you go on a campus and there wasn't a lady to be seen.
Well, had I gone straight through, I wouldn't have even been able to been married at the seminary. They didn't let you get married.
Tell me about that. Someone literally told you when you were getting ready to go, thinking about going, they said it's not okay for you to be married at the seminary campus.
Yeah, the only place you could be married was if you went to Springfield.
Okay. Well, there you go. That makes sense. I know that my grandfather, he went to St. Louis, and my grandma told me that there was this very strange thing where he wasn't. It would be frowned upon if he'd have been married at seminary, but it was also frowned upon that by the time he got to his first call, he wasn't married if he was still single then. So they had this expectation that you get married in like the 3 or 4 months between seminary graduation and your first call.
Actually, a lot of the guys were getting married the week after they graduated.
Oh, so they probably were dating someone and...
Oh, yeah, they were dating, and you weren't even supposed to be really engaged if I would have gone straight through.
Right.
All of a sudden, you had to have a girlfriend that wanted to marry you within a week. Yeah.
I think at one time I was sitting at a dinner table with Ron Feuerhahn because I knew his brother Harold, and Ron told a story about some guys at the seminary, and they had hit a car out in the woods, and they would, on weekends they would take the car out and go out and do things, because you couldn't really, at that time back in the 60s, the seminary campus was a ways from almost anything. It was hard to get anywhere. Now it's kind of right in the middle of town, but back then it was a ways from anything.
Oh, when I went to Concordia, Missouri, we couldn't even have a car on campus.
Really?
If you came with a car in your college years, you had to turn the keys into the dean of students, and you could only get them on the weekend if they had permission from your parents that you were going home or needed to use the car.
That is amazing. I had no idea. I thought, when I went down to seminary, I thought it was weird that I didn't have a car, because all my friends had cars, but I didn't have one. I would ride the train to North Dakota to see my mom and dad back and forth. But I had, they didn't prohibit us from having cars, that's for sure.
Yeah, I had to take the bus. I took the bus to Kansas City, and from Kansas City, I took the bus up through Iowa. We'd stop in Des Moines and then on up to Blair, Iowa, and that's where there was a bus stop, and my parents would meet the bus there and pick me up and take me home for breaks.
That must have been a long trip on the bus.
Oh, yeah. I would leave about 1 o'clock in the afternoon and get up there about 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah. The train was pretty long, too, getting from St. Louis all the way up to Minot, North Dakota, is where they'd drop us. My parents would drive an hour up to Minot and come get me and then take me home, and we'd spend the break together. So you decide you're at a church, and you're serving as a principal and a teacher, and the admission counselor, you said Pastor, who was the guy that you knew at St. Louis?
David Wallenberg.
Wallenberg. You know what? Am I wrong in thinking that he was a professor at seminary at one time?
He was a professor there, yes.
I think I took pastor as educator from David Wallenberg. I'm pretty
Probably.
sure. Did he smoke a pipe?
Yes.
Yeah, that was David Wallenberg. He would walk around campus and smoke a pipe like a chimney.
Jerry.
Yeah.
She went to Concordia, Missouri too. That's where they met and ultimately married.
Yeah, he taught pastor as educator to me when I was there. Yeah.
Okay.
He was a character.
Yeah, he's a year younger than I am.
Okay. So that must have been kind of hard, and yet I imagine the people were probably happy for you too when you told them, hey, we're going to leave the school and go to seminary. How did the people react to that who were at your church?
Most of them were very excited for me.
I think that's probably the case. We have a seminarian right now, and he's an integral member of the congregation. Great to have around. I love to have him around. He's a big help, but I'm more excited for the fact that he's going to be going out and being trained to be a pastor and do really good work in the community. In the community that he's called to, that church he's called to. Those people are going to value him probably more than we'll value him as a member. We as a congregation, we'll have to figure out how to pick up the slack in spite of losing him. So.
Exactly.
Well, so then you finished your degree, you finished your seminary training, but was it shortened at all?
We had 2 years of work that we had to do, so I went full summers.
Okay.
And I worked in the publicity office the summer. And I also had a job, when I first went there, I was an assistant to Dr. Wayne Schmidt, who was head of the music department.
Sure.
And so I worked under him, played organ for chapel, and accompanied the SEM choirs.
Now, when you were there, they were still doing chapel in the.
They were still doing it in Weller, yes.
Yeah, in Weller Hall, yeah. The chapel hadn't been built yet. But what kind of organ did they have in there? Was it a nice one, or was it kind of...
Yes, they had a nice pipe organ.
Oh, really?
When they redid it, ended up buying that organ and taking it and having it installed in their church. I'm not sure where that was, but... Right,
because Weller doesn't have an organ in it anymore.
No.
It's mostly for, lectures and things like that now, but...
Yes.
Yeah, I remember in my Seminics class, they showed a lot of pictures of Weller Hall, because that's where chapel and stuff was held, and there was a lot of stuff in there that isn't there anymore. It's changed quite a bit.
I got there 2 years after the walkout.
Oh, did you really?
Yes.
Well, that's probably too big of a can of worms to open here, but I imagine that the campus population was pretty low at the time.
We had about 55 to 60 guys.
And typically St. Louis Seminary had how many students
They
usually?
had, well, before the walkout, they had several hundred.
Yeah. So it really took a dive after
Yes.
Seminex, and for a couple of years it was like that. But eventually then it sprung back up, and we got back to the old class sizes. Um, where was your first call to?
My first call was to Decatur, Illinois.
Decatur, and you were serving as a sole pastor there.
Yes.
How big of a church? What kind of church was it?
It had about 350 communicants.
And did you were you directing choir, doing all the typical things we kind of know you for at Our Redeemer there as well?
No.
You didn't direct the choir there.
We were in a school association. It was called LSA, Lutheran School Association of Decatur.
Uh huh.
Oh, some of the teachers were members of our congregation, and one of the teachers did the directing of the choir.
Oh, okay. I suppose being a pastor also precluded you from playing organ there as well.
Yeah, I would play once in a while if the organist wanted me to play something in particular, but other than that, there was one Sunday when the organ quit working because we had an old organ. We ended up getting a brand new one while I was there, but the organ quit working. And so I was standing up front. It was the final hymn, and we always stood for the final hymn in that congregation. That was the tradition. And the piano was right down below where the choir sang down the steps. So the organ quit working, and I just went down the steps, pulled out the bench, put my hymnal on the piano, and kept playing the hymn that we were on.
So the organ quit in the middle of the song.
Yeah, it would get on the fritz every once in a while.
Oh,
So when that started happening, the people said, it's time to get rid of that. So we did.
well, I was so amazed when you told me too that this is early on when I was here. That I think Kathy and I was asking somebody, and Kathy said, "Well, we just try to avoid those keys because they don't work." And I said, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, there are a bunch of keys in the organ that don't work. We just try to work our way around them." And I said, "Why aren't we fixing this problem? Let's get a new organ."
Some of the stops, the sounds didn't work either.
Yeah, and we have since got a new organ, and that's been a good thing.
Yes.
So after Decatur, Illinois, where did you head?
Then I went to Grand Island, Nebraska.
That's not far from us, is it? In Sioux Falls,
No,
it's what is it? A couple hours? Well, it's more than that.
it's about 4 hours.
Right, and I've learned a little bit about Grand Island. It's kind of a lake community, isn't it? They're up in Grand Island. There's big lakes there. Is that right?
There's a small lake there, not a big one.
Oh, okay, okay.
It's on the Platte River.
And
Platte River is just south of Grand Island.
and your family is originally from Minnesota, right?
Jan's family is from Minnesota. My family is from Iowa.
That's right. So Nebraska is a ways from both of your family units.
Yes.
How long did you serve in Nebraska?
I was in Grand Island for 3 years as the associate.
Was it different going from being a sole pastor to an associate?
Uh, I visited with an associate pastor in Decatur before I accepted the call. And I said, what do you have to know if you're going to go from being the sole pastor to be an associate? Because that's what he had done.
Mm-hmm.
Is you need to know that when the secretary calls and says, Pastor, you have a call, that's not going to be for you, it'll be for the senior pastor.
That must have been an adjustment going from being the guy in charge to being the guy second in charge.
It really wasn't, because I had enough to do without it. We had 2,500 communicants.
That's a lot.
Yes. And
What was the name of that church?
It was we two pastors, and then we had a vicar.
Oh, okay. What was the name of the church in Grand Island?
Trinity.
Okay. Now, from Nebraska, is that when you take the call to Sioux Falls?
I went from Grand Island to Pierce, and we were there 4 years.
Pierce, is that's Excuse my ignorance. Is Pierce in South Dakota?
No, it's in Nebraska.
Nebraska. Okay. And you were there how
It's
long?
just by Norfolk.
Okay. Yeah, I know where Norfolk is.
I was there for 4 years.
Okay. And then after Pierce, then you took the call to Sioux Falls.
Yes, and after Pearson, I got the call to Sioux Falls.
How old were you when you took the call to Sioux Falls here? You were in your 40s or your 50s?
When I came to Sioux Falls, I was 44.
44. Okay. And you were here when the church built the addition. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That was kind of during your tenure.
Yes.
The administration and the education additions, they were built during your
Yes.
time here. Um, and then from here you went and did some district level work. Is that right?
I went for 1 year up to Minneapolis at the congregation where I've been principal and teacher, and the district called me back, and I accepted that call.
Was it the Nebraska district or South Dakota district?
South Dakota district, to be the exact, in the South Dakota district.
Now, what kind of work were you doing as a South Dakota executive secretary?
Oh, it was my job to visit all the schools and to make recommendations and observations of their classrooms. And the other thing I was responsible for was making sure that if the district president wasn't there, that it was my job to make sure that the district office was running the way it should and get everything done that we needed to get done while he was gone.
Mm-hmm.
I was in charge of all of that while he was gone. Thing was, at that time, we were allowed to preach in any of the congregations. So since I was responsible for youth and stewardship and education and all that stuff and missions, then I would go out and preach in congregations all over South Dakota.
Sounds like you were pretty busy back then.
Oh, yes. A lot of traveling,
Was
And
that
going-
hard on your kids?
going to synodical conferences.
Was it hard on your kids being traveling all
Well,
that
by
much?
that time, all of our kids were out of the house.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay. Um,
Mark was in college and getting married.
I have to imagine that, although it sounds like you were preaching a great deal, but I have to imagine going to district type work when you've been doing pastoral ministry for so long, that must have been an adjustment.
It was an adjustment, but you had to realize that's what the Lord called you to do, and so that's what you did.
Did you enjoy the district level work or did you prefer pastoral ministry?
I enjoyed the district work, but after a while, after being in it 7 years, it was like the Lord was saying, it's time for you to get back and do something in the parish or whatever. And that's when I got the call to the prep school that I had graduated from in Missouri, and I was there for 3 years.
And you were there as a chaplain, as a principal?
I was the dean of students, and I also was the theological instructor.
Oh man, boy, that sounds. I don't know if I'm right or wrong here, Pastor Shane, but that kind of sounds like your dream job.
Oh yeah, it was. I had four theology classes to teach, and I had 6 sections of students. And then I was dean of chapel, so I wrote all the schedule surrounding the theme verse for the year and set up all the faculty, the males that would do chapels on Monday and Friday, and then I scheduled circuit pastors to do the chapel on Wednesdays.
Shortly now, from that job, did you retire from there? Is that when you retired, or did you take
That's
another?
when I retired from there, yes.
And then you came back to Sioux Falls.
And we came back to Sioux Falls, and I was visitation pastor for a while.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, the principal of the Lutheran High School said, I can't do all this. How would you like to teach some of the theology classes part-time?
Right.
So then I took on teaching there, and
How many years did you end up teaching in total at the high school here in Sioux
7.
Falls?
7.
7 years. I've heard many good things about your courses. Especially, I've heard a lot of people talk about your apologetics course at the high
Yeah,
school.
that was a good course. That was
Yeah.
one that I developed at Lutheran High here.
You know, the maybe just getting a little off track, but an interesting question to talk about it. When I first started, I didn't, I kind of thought the only important things were word and sacrament ministry, preaching, caring for my people, and teaching, really getting the scriptures and teaching them in Bible study. I was kind of averse to doing topical studies, and at times I was a little averse to doing apologetics and maybe creation science because it has in some circles, mostly liberal, academic circles, they really look down on people who study creation science and they do apologetics for Christianity. But the more and more I spend time with young people going off to college, I realize that apologetics is desperately needed to be taught.
Yeah. Yeah, if we don't teach them in the church before they get off to college, a good chance is that they're going to be brainwashed when they get there.
Yeah, which makes that apologetics course in the Lutheran High so very important that they get kind of immersed in it before they go off to college, because it's going to be, you're right, it is a brainwashing, absolutely. Well, is there anything you'd like to add about your timeline, your history of coming? It seems to me that what you're saying is on your kind of your journey is that there was always a tugging going on in the background. God was always tugging at your heart the whole time to be a pastor. There was just some bumps along the way.
Yes.
I'm not a big fan of reading into, emotional things or experiences because they're not. I'd rather, read what the Word has to tell us. But I think those kind of emotions or those kind of maybe God tugging has got to play a part. There's got to be some inclination that it's not just that I want to be up there in front of people, but that I feel like God is calling me to serve.
Well, Luther talks about that you have to have the inner call and the outer call both.
Yes, exactly. And probably neither one of them should be necessarily more important than the other.
No, they can't be exclusive.
Right. Yeah. Well, can I ask you, I've got some questions here. I don't know if I'll ask them all because we're already a little late here, but what was for you the most rewarding thing about pastoral ministry?
I was thinking about that,
It's, by the way, it's not a very fair question. It's a really hard question to answer. So,
right. There were a couple of things that I thought of. The first one was being able to share the gospel with people who were not churched or were not believers, and seeing the light bulb turn on for them and that they came to faith. The last thing that I thought of was being able to be with someone who is dying and to assure them that they were going to be in heaven and have eternal life, and to be there for them while they were dying.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to explain to people. I think, but I think you get it. I think a lot of people would be afraid to be there on someone's deathbed, but there's something about being able to. I would say this, Pastor Shane, and I'm not surprised you say that. I think standing in the fray and reassuring hearts that are afraid at their most vulnerable moments is the definition of a servant, right? You want to make sure people know.
In our pastoral theology class at the seminary, that's one of the most important places you need to be in your ministry, because that's where the devil's going to work hardest on that person before they die.
Yep, absolutely. It can, can I maybe just go off on a little tangent this question too? I've been there when a couple people have passed, literally the moment when they passed. I can say that only one time it really, really got to me, where I was emotionally kind of, compromised for a while. Like I couldn't get a hold of my emotions. Was it hard for you to be in the room when people passed?
Oh yeah, because some of these people you've gotten to be really close to, and they've shared their lives with you, whether it was with their grandkids or their kids or whatever, and you were giving private communion to them in their homes, and all of a sudden there you are, and that's the end of that relationship here on earth. And that's hard to let go of sometimes.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would agree with that 100%. Um, I'm gonna save I'm gonna save this one question. Well, let's ask it now. So the most rewarding thing for you, being able to share the gospel and have people kind of learn and come to faith, and also being with people on their deathbed and reassuring them in the midst of maybe the things they're going through. What is one of the hardest things to deal with? And you can phrase that question however you want to phrase it, but what's one of the more difficult things to do in terms of pastoral ministry?
One of the hardest things to deal with was what I had to deal with when I went to Decatur, Illinois. We had taken a youth group to Chicago for a youth conference. And when we got back, 4 months later, I had to bury one of the young men. I still get choked up about it.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to dig too deep, but
16 years old, brand new car that his dad had just bought him for his birthday, sitting in the driveway. And he had been at the high school and was walking along the street, and a dump truck came along and threw him underneath the dump truck and ran over him.
It's hard to make sense of that.
But the good thing was, the night that we were in Chicago, we were passing around Jan and my room and talking to the youth about what they'd learned that day. And Brian said, the one thing I learned was that I went to a session on death and dying, and he said, it doesn't make any difference how old or how young you are, as long as you believe in Jesus, it's going to be all right.
Wow, that gives you chills.
And I was able to share that with all these high school kids that were gathered there for his funeral.
I imagine that meant a lot to his parents too.
Yeah, because I waited to share that at the funeral message. I didn't tell them before that.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry. That's probably a tough thing to deal with. Why don't I ask you this one to kind of change veins a little bit? Who is a pastor that you looked up to?
Oh, there were a lot of them. You know, when I first got out of the seminary, I had two guys in our circuit. One was Walt Lemmerman, who just passed away recently, and the other one was George Biderweeden, who passed away several years ago. And they both took me under their wing and were mentoring me and helping me with things. And if I had questions, all I had to do was call them up and say, what do I do about this or that or something else? And
these guys were in your circuit?
Pardon?
These guys were in your circuit?
Yes.
That's how a circuit's supposed to work.
One was my circuit counselor, and the other one was old enough probably to be my father.
I was taking doxology courses, and it turns out that Hal Senkbeil was in my grandfather's circuit when my grandfather was a circuit counselor. So Hal told me a bunch of things about my grandfather. My grandfather passed away before I was born. I never knew him. So it was so amazing to hear these stories, because I had heard stories from the congregants, and I had heard stories from my parents and from my aunts and uncles. But I'd never heard stories from his contemporaries, his pastor friends. It was really cool to see that. You know, I think
always good to hear.
Lately in our church, we've really lost this idea of circuit. You know, we boil everything down to just individual churches, and we forget that there are other pastors in our town and in our county, all working for the same goals and purposes, and they're good men too. I'm going to ask this because it's you and me, and we have a funny connection. So I'm going to ask you about Arthur.
Arthur is your uncle.
My great uncle. Yep.
Your great uncle. Yes.
Well, he was my grandfather's brother. Yeah.
Yes. And so he did Jan and my wedding because he was Jan's pastor.
That's right. And I don't think you had him for a pastor very long, but it is interesting that LCMS is a very small place sometimes.
Yes.
So there was three.
Whenever we would go back, I would never let him know that I was coming. And one Sunday he said, There's a man who sits in our church that always sneaks in and sits in the pew and never lets me know he's coming so he can preach before the whole congregation.
That sounds like fun. I never met Arthur or Otto either. Actually, that's not true. I met Otto as a young boy. I was probably 8 or 9. I think he passed away shortly thereafter. But he preached at one of my aunt's weddings, and I was at the wedding. So, let's see. Well, here let me ask you two questions. Maybe will hopefully be shorter ones in a row. What is your favorite book besides the Bible or the Book of Concord?
The hymnal.
I should have let that down as one of the ones you couldn't pick. Okay, well, give me a book that you think maybe people don't know about, but they benefit from, that you really love.
Well, our hymnal lays out doctrine so clearly, and so when we sing these hymns, it's not just they have something to do in church.
No.
If you reread the words afterwards.
Yeah.
The other day I was thinking about this hymn and it was running through my head, "Be still my soul." And so I read through the words again, and it's like these are speaking to right what we're dealing with this pandemic situation.
That's right.
They're written hundreds and thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
These hymns still have meaning today.
At one time Luther's hymnal was 20 hymns. And yes. I imagine if we had 20 hymns and we were singing them consistently, we would have not only the services memorized and the catechism memorized, but we'd have all those hymns memorized too.
Exactly.
I don't know, and as a musician, I don't know what's wrong or right. Part of me as a pastor would love to have all my people have memorized 20 hymns. But then as a musician and someone who just loves music, I really do love the fact that we have so many hymns to choose from that do so many different things. We have, the thing I love about the hymnal now is there's a hymn for Maundy Thursday, and that's just absolutely only about Maundy Thursday. And there's a hymn that's only about the Ascension, and there's a hymn that's only about the Transfiguration. And so no Christian contemporary music can do that, can be so specific and do so much good catechesis and teaching as our hymns do.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. Well, then let me ask you this. What is your favorite Bible verse?
My confirmation verse.
Can you give it to me?
John chapter 10, verses 27 and 28. "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and I give unto them eternal life. They shall never perish, neither shall any man pluck them out of my hand."
That's a good one. Who is your confirmation pastor?
Norman Rothie.
And did he pick those for you?
Yes. It wasn't like today where you get to pick your own confirmation verse.
Oh, I don't let my kids pick their own either. I for the most part, I pick them for them.
They assigned them.
Yeah. I think that's a really wonderful part about being a pastor is when you pick those confirmation verses, you're trying to encapsulate who these kids are as a person, who you hope they'll be, the faith that you hope they'll have in the future. It's almost hopeful that this is a promise or a seal that they'll be these people. Every kid that I've ever confirmed, my deepest prayer, my biggest hope is that they remain in the faith till they die.
Yeah.
And so that verse is maybe more important that they know it is. Let's see. Well, I'll ask you. Well, maybe I might ask this. What has pastoral ministry been like for your family, your wife and your kids?
My wife knew what she was getting into because she'd been in the parish as a teacher.
Okay.
So when I was principal in Minneapolis, I was gone like 3 or 4 nights a week plus all day long. I would see my kids usually between 4 and 6:30.
But you were good about trying to create a window where you were seeing your kids every day.
Yes, even when I was out of the seminary, kids would get off the bus at 3:30, and I told them they had from 3:30 till 5:30 that was their time with me. if I had meetings in the evening. I said,
Right.
it's your choice what you want. But I said, if you decide you want to play with your friends after school, that's fine. But this is your time with me that is designated and set aside. And I said, if you choose to be with your friends, that's fine. But I don't want to hear afterwards that Dad never took any time with us.
Right. Well, it is maybe in the sense of people thinking about pastoral ministry. I think a wife and a children, they do share their father and their husband with the church. But there are so many benefits to being a pastor and a pastor's wife and pastor's kids respectively. I think they kind of balance each other out. I don't know of many people who, I know for a fact there's hundreds of people every night who pray for me, who lift me up in their personal prayers when they go to bed, that I would be a good pastor, that I would be healthy, that I would be safe, taken care of. A lot of people don't get that kind of love and care. So
Exactly.
there are what's the word? You kind of give and take. There are hard things about ministry, but then there are wonderful things about ministry. Not many people get to stand up in front of a group of people every Sunday and preach the gospel. That is a gift that's given to a precious few people, and it is precious. It's
Yes.
a wonderful. Not everybody gets to do it. And for myself, I always struggled with when I was growing up as a high schooler. I had musical gifts and abilities, and I thought it might be better. It might be a better gift to the church to be a really good high school music teacher, but then lead a music program at a church and make it a really good one. Because as well as anybody that a good music program at a church means a lot.
Yes.
But one of my pastors in high school, Pastor Brad Stoltenol, said to me, Ryan, you can be a pastor and you can still do music. They're
Yes.
not mutually exclusive, which
Exactly.
again, you show in spades, and I hope that I have as well. So, well, let's close up with one question. I was gonna ask you a question. You said you didn't like the question, so I'm gonna make it really vague. I'm gonna let you answer it, okay? But
Okay.
the question was, I was thinking along the lines of, I know in my head like 4 or 5 sermons that I've written over my lifetime now that I think of as among my best. And so I was going to ask you, what do you think is the best sermon you ever wrote? But you just like, I'm not sure if I know how to answer that. So maybe in a sense of like, what's the best sermon, or maybe the sermon in the hardest situation to write, or what's a sermon you'd like to maybe talk about that you wrote when you were pastoring?
I think one of the toughest sermons to write is when you have somebody who commits suicide.
I have not had that happen to me, so I don't know anything about it. Why don't you tell me about that?
It's more than you want to deal with, but you have to deal with it. I've had 3 or 4 of them. And some of them you just scratch your head and say, how and why did this happen?
Yeah.
Because there was one guy that I had given communion to the week before, and the next week he decided the night before Thanksgiving that was going to be it.
What do you hold on to in that kind of a situation? What gospel handles do you grasp onto?
You have to grasp with the fact that a person is not saved by works but by grace. And you have to just commend it to God at that and say, I'm not going to judge why this person did what they did or whatever. And you have to just hold on to the gospel and share that Jesus Christ is the Lord of life and death, and that he died to save people no matter what circumstance that they were in. And some people just snap mentally and they can't handle it anymore.
Yeah, one thing that I've been running into a little bit, this is not the same, but it's maybe in the same vein, just the idea that I think everyone has a tender spot where the devil is coming after them,
Oh, yes.
And the thing is, it manifests differently for everyone. We've got a member, I've talked about a couple of times, that a member from the congregation, she's a lovely, wonderful person, but she has to get a blood transfusion every 2 weeks, you know, and I think that could really wear on a person. It could really wear you out, tire you out, make you very frustrated and angry. I think for her, that's her tender spot, you know, where the devil's trying to get after her.
The devil studies those spots and he works on them.
Yeah, he does. You know, I know for me, I think it's maybe vanity, pride, and it's worrying, you know, and for other people, he comes. But I think for us to think that we're not gonna be susceptible to his poking and proddings. The problem is that when I think that's probably what they talk about. You know, when you become overcome with despair, and the devil wins. That's the problem. I don't think it's wrong to have a tender spot and to be afflicted. It's wrong to give up all hope. We have a couple minutes. Did you want to ask me anything?
I tried to think about that if I had any questions for you, and I really can't think of any.
You know, one thing that I'm sure is different is, you know, ministry is the same for the most part. It's caring for people. It's preaching the gospel. It's making sure that the scriptures are the number one priority in terms of what you're teaching, what you're preaching, how you're administering the sacraments, how you're living, right? I think the one thing that has changed is that technology has made the very thing we're doing right now. Technology has made a lot of things different. Especially even if this pandemic would happen 10 years ago, you know, I wonder how things would have looked, you know, being able to do services online and being able to put out Bible studies and devotions, things that there are good things to it, and then there are bad things to it. I'm a little nervous as we go forward that people will start thinking that the computer screen is a replacement for being present in God's house for word and sacrament ministry. It just isn't.
No, I like what the Episcopal Church put out several years ago. They said, "Since when can you get the Lord's Supper through a screen?"
Yeah. In fact, I once saw a cartoon about that. I think where the guy had set up. It was just a funny cartoon. The guy had set up his PC, you know, and the disk drive would pop out, and there would be water, wine, and bread in there, and it would pop out, and yeah, I don't think that's a reality. We need the church, and I think there is a thing that is real. It's the consolation of the brethren. I think sometimes we talk about we're part of a family and we love the people that we're spending time with, and we almost miss seeing them. But there's something deeper than that. It's that we're gathering as a congregation, as a family, and we all sit and look in the same direction. We're all looking at the cross. We're all looking at Jesus. We're all hearing the gospel together. So we're bound together by more than just friendship. We're family in Christ. And it's not good to be apart as family, but rather for us to be all together. It's a hard thing to be apart right now.
Well, we need to remember it's not just about me and my Jesus, but it's me and my communion with the saints.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's one thing I've taught about in confirmation. You're exactly right, is that we go up there and it's not just me and Jesus, but it's me and Jesus and the people here and the people there. You're exactly right. Well, Pastor Shane, your story is fascinating. I really enjoyed hearing about it, and I actually understand you a lot better now than prior to, which we had this conversation 5 years ago. But
Sure.
I'm glad to talk to you today. The Lord's blessings be upon you, and we look very forward to being together in church very, very soon.
Amen to that.
Amen. You have a great day, okay, sir?
You too. Thank you.
Bye now.